Well, one group that's concerned about the retaliatory tariffs the agriculture industry.
I'm not changing anything right now. The only thing that's going to cause a problem is if we have the same problem we had during COVID with supply issues, that you can't get this or you can't get that.
Haven't seen it yet. The market actually was up yesterday, and I haven't checked today what it's doing.
U.S. farm exports collapsed by 94%, the biggest drop in decades. And now a nationwide agriculture crisis is erupting, threatening farmers and food prices. Tonight, across the heartland of America, a quiet anxiety spreads like wildfire. Farmers already facing thin margins and unpredictable markets now brace for something far worse. A looming storm from Washington threatens to reshape their world. President Trump has issued a chilling warning: the deportation of millions of undocumented immigrants. And while he promises his new tariffs will shield American farmers and ranchers, the very people on the front lines, farmers and economists, paint a far darker picture. They warn this will not just bruise California's farmers, but hammer California's grocery shoppers too. Meanwhile, in the White House press room, Trump declares defiantly, "We're standing up for our great farmers and ranchers brutalized by nations around the world." But are his policies saving them or sinking them? Before we begin, make sure to hit the like button. It helps us beat the YouTube algorithm. The numbers tell a story of collapse. U.S. farm exports have nosedived, a jaw-dropping 94% drop, one of the steepest free falls in modern trade history. Ports that once bustled with shipments now sit eerily quiet. Silos filled to capacity stand as monuments to a broken market. Grain tombs where harvests lie unwanted. Farmers wait, dreading the next shoe to drop. Could this be the spark of a national food and financial crisis? Just 60 days into 2025, U.S. sorghum exports to China. The critical income stream for farmers in Kansas and Texas have plummeted to near zero. Their lifeline gone in the blink of an eye. Silos now overflow with kernels no one will touch. Does President Trump fully grasp how his policies are gutting the agricultural engine of America? Before we continue, make sure to hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Picture this: silos filled to bursting, but not a buyer in sight. Herds of cattle and hogs, once worth a fortune, now barely fetch pennies on the pound. And farm towns, once bustling at high noon, have fallen eerily quiet. In 2025, the American farmer faces a nightmare few thought possible. A new trade war has transformed fields of bounty into graveyards of unsold crops. And what happens when your biggest customer, China, slams its doors shut overnight? The stakes couldn't be higher. A way of life cultivated over generations is now hanging by a thread. It all began with a jarring policy shockwave. Early in 2025, the U.S. fired the opening shot, sweeping new tariffs on dozens of foreign countries. A bold gamble by a new administration that promised to protect American industry. But the world didn't take it lying down. China, the biggest buyer of U.S. farm goods, struck back with ferocity. They slammed American imports with a 34% tariff effective April 10th. This piled on top of the 10 to 15% duties Beijing had quietly rolled out a month before. Almost overnight, American farm exports became prohibitively expensive. One grain trader put it bluntly, "It's like shutting down all U.S. agricultural imports." And just as quickly, other trading partners joined the fight. The European Union, historically a major buyer of U.S. soy and pork, hinted at tariffs of their own. By April, American agriculture found itself surrounded. "This is going to cost the U.S. a lot of export business," warned Jack Scoville of Price Futures Group. His words echoed across farm country like a distant storm warning. "We're pissing off everybody. Where are we going to turn if we've slapped everyone with tariffs?" The financial markets didn't wait to find out. When China unveiled its retaliation on April 4th, commodity prices fell like a stone. Soybean futures crashed beef 4%. In a single day, plunging to $9.77 per bushel, the lowest level of the year. Corn and wheat weren't far behind. Corn futures slipped below $450. But these aren't just numbers on a board in Chicago. They are the very lifeblood of America's family farms. Every cent lost is thousands of dollars slipping away from farm families' hands, and the blows kept coming one after another. By mid-April, U.S. soybeans faced a crushing 44% import tax in China, up from the already devastating 25% rate of the previous trade war. Other staples like corn and wheat were hit even harder. Chinese buyers now face tariffs as high as 49% on these crops. For American farmers, it felt as though someone had posted a giant keep out sign on every grain shipment leaving U.S. ports. But if you really want to understand the human impact, you have to zoom in crop by crop, farm by farm, town by town. No crop symbolizes U.S.-China trade quite like soybeans, and no crop has fallen harder. For years, China bought nearly half of all U.S. soybean exports. In 2024 alone, China purchased over $12.8 billion worth of American soybeans. But in a single policy stroke, that lifeline was cut off. A 44% tariff priced U.S. soybeans right out of the market. Chinese importers stopped buying practically overnight. It's like shutting down all U.S. agricultural imports, repeated one grain trader in Singapore. The consequences have been catastrophic. Mountains of soybeans are piling up across the Midwest, waiting for buyers who may never come. Elevators ran out of storage space long ago. Now, massive pyramids of beans covered only by tarps sit exposed at the edges of fields, vulnerable to rain, rot, and ruin. Prices hover between $9 and $10 a bushel, barely enough to cover costs. For some, it's already below break-even. In just 1 year, U.S. farm exports to China have been slashed nearly in half, falling to their lowest levels in decades. A market that American farmers spent 40 years building has been wiped out almost overnight. And for sorghum farmers, it's a nightmare they've seen before. Sorghum, an incredibly drought-tolerant crop, had become a niche export for China, which until recently was its primary overseas buyer. But when Beijing's new tariffs hit, sorghum exports dried up almost instantly. The entire $1 billion sorghum trade with China now faces a 44% tariff wall. Orders vanished, and the echoes of the past are hard to ignore. Back in 2018, China slapped an even higher 78% tariff on U.S. sorghum. What happened then? A fleet of sorghum-laden cargo ships already en route to China was left stranded at sea, circling aimlessly. No buyer, no port. Millions of bushels left drifting on the waves. That haunting image has returned in 2025. But this time, ships aren't even leaving port. Sorghum shipments are being canceled before they leave the docks. Once again, grain that should be nourishing livestock or feeding people has become little more than a bargaining chip in a geopolitical feud. Corn might wear the crown in the American Midwest, but it too has been caught in the crossfire. Every year, U.S. corn growers rely on foreign markets to buy about 15% of their crop. China had been steadily increasing its corn purchases alongside major buyers like Mexico, Japan, and South Korea. Now, those crucial sales are at risk. China's retaliation hit corn with a punishing 49% tariff, 15% from earlier rounds, plus the new 34%. This move effectively locked U.S. corn out of the Chinese market. In total, over $21 billion in corn and soybean exports are suddenly at risk from these new tariffs. Corn prices already weighed down by strong harvests spiraled lower, slumping to multi-month lows near $450 per bushel. And ironically, just as markets collapsed, U.S. farmers were on track for one of their largest corn harvests in history. The USDA projected a mammoth 15.8 billion bushels, the biggest crop since 2016. But now that bumper harvest feels more like a curse than a blessing. With the export markets evaporating, American farmers are now facing a brutal dilemma. Do they pay for expensive storage, praying for a market rebound, or do they sell at a loss? Watching years of hard work slip away for pennies on the dollar. Many are opting for storage, gambling that global tensions will cool. Nearly half of last year's corn crop remains unsold, waiting in grain bins across the Midwest. But it's a risky bet. Time and weather chip away at grain quality, and every month of storage racks up costs farmers can barely afford. Wheat farmers haven't been spared either. Once a symbol of American abundance, wheat is now a casualty of the tariff wars. China, which had slowly grown into a vital wheat customer, the fourth largest, added a painful 15% tariff in the first wave, then piled on the blanket 34%, bringing the total tariff burden on U.S. wheat exports to nearly 49%. For North Dakota and Kansas growers who battled drought last year, this is a cruel twist of fate. Better weather had finally delivered a strong crop, but now a man-made storm is crushing prices. Chicago wheat futures tumbled to contract lows. Farmgate price barely $550 per bushel, with USDA forecast trimming expectations even further as Asian buyers like China pivot to cheaper wheat from Australia and Argentina. Traditional customers in Japan and the Philippines are growing nervous about the reliability of U.S. supply. For American farmers, it feels like a double blow. Better harvests, but nowhere to sell them. And just when they thought the worst was over, it gets worse still. Because it's not just grain. The meat and dairy sectors, pillars of rural America's economy, are taking body blows of their own. China didn't stop at crops. When retaliating, U.S. beef and pork exports now face tariffs totaling around 44%, and poultry is hit with nearly 49% in duties. For industries that depend heavily on export markets, especially China, this is devastating. More than 20% of U.S. farm income comes from selling abroad. Pork producers, for example, normally export a quarter of their production with China, often the biggest buyer for cuts like pig feet and organ meats that aren't as popular in the U.S. But that pipeline has shut down almost overnight. Pork shipments to China have all but disappeared, taking a major revenue stream with them. Beef, too, is suffering. Just a few years ago, China finally reopened its doors to American beef after a decades-long ban. It quickly became one of the top 3 export markets. But now, a 10% beef tariff plus the sweeping 34% levy threaten to erase that hard-won progress. And it doesn't stop there. U.S. poultry producers are reeling as well. China slapped a 15% tariff on American chicken meat, then further squeezed the industry by suspending import permits for key U.S. poultry processors, citing vague food safety concerns. Farmers are watching helplessly as their carefully grown product backs up in cold storage warehouses. Surplus chicken wings, pork shoulders, and beef cuts meant for foreign plates now crowd domestic freezers. Prices for hogs and cattle are falling fast as supplies that were supposed to go abroad flood the U.S. market instead. Across barns, feedlots, and processing plants, the mood has turned from optimism to dread. Ranchers who celebrated record beef prices last year now face shrinking bids. It's a sudden and brutal reversal. The refrain is the same everywhere. We have the product, we've lost the buyer, and when buyers disappear at this scale, the damage radiates far beyond the farm gates. The shockwaves are rippling through entire rural communities, testing the resilience of the agricultural economy. Just a few months ago, farmers entered 2025 with cautious optimism. Strong harvests and decent prices hinted at a good year. Now they are staring down a financial gut punch. Incomes are plunging, bills are piling up, and many are wondering just how much longer they can hang on. The early warning signs are flashing red. Farm bankruptcies, which had stabilized in recent years, are surging once again. In 2024, family farm bankruptcies filed under Chapter 12 spiked by 55%, and that was before the latest round of tariffs hit. Now, just in the first quarter of 2025, bankruptcies have nearly doubled year over year. 82 farms filed for bankruptcy in just 3 months, the fastest rate of collapse since the devastating farm crisis of the 1980s. What's going on in Washington? That's the question on everyone's lips, says one farm bankruptcy attorney, describing the desperation of his clients. Each bankruptcy isn't just a business failure. It's the loss of a family's legacy. Land passed down through generations now slipping away under the weight of policy decisions made far from these fields. Even for those farmers still clinging on, the financial stress is growing unbearable. Operating costs have soared in recent years, and tariffs only add to the strain. Critical farm supplies like fertilizer, machinery, and chemicals are now more expensive because of U.S. import tariffs on steel, electronics, and components often sourced from China. Tractors and combines, for instance, rely on Chinese-made parts, now taxed at 25%, sending equipment prices soaring. Fertilizers face tariffs exceeding 30%, jacking up the cost of every acre planted. So even as export revenues vanish, farmers are paying more to grow their crops. It's a textbook cost price squeeze, and America's farmers are caught right in the middle, crushed between higher expenses and lower prices. The financial cracks are widening fast. Bank. Loan officers across the Midwest report a sharp rise in delinquent farm loans as cash flows evaporate. In some regions, the share of farm loans with serious repayment problems has reached its highest level since 2020, when the last trade war and bad weather left farmers struggling. Loan repayment rates have fallen for 5 consecutive quarters. Banks are extending and restructuring loans to buy farmers more time, but every extension is a warning sign. The Federal Reserve's regional surveys paint a grim picture. Farm debt is climbing and credit conditions are deteriorating rapidly. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, one that many saw coming when trade tensions first escalated but hoped would be avoided at the last minute. And then there's the human toll. Farming has always been a solitary, difficult life. But now, a deep isolation and worry have set in. Crisis hotlines report an increase in calls from farmers feeling overwhelmed, trapped by forces beyond their control. At coffee shops and grain elevators, conversations circle the same haunting questions. Have you heard about a deal? How long can this last? Are you selling your crop or waiting it out? Rumors fly, whispers of a bailout or maybe a breakthrough in trade talks. But for now, nothing concrete has arrived. And as hope fades, the ripple effects spread outward. Equipment dealers and seed companies are seeing sales dry up. As farmers hold back spending, banks in small towns are growing cautious, tightening lending terms. Farm suppliers have started laying off workers or cutting hours, bracing for the storm ahead. Even local diners and shops, places that have survived droughts and floods, are feeling the pinch as farm families tighten their belts. It's an all-too-familiar story for rural America. When farming sneezes, small towns catch pneumonia. And yet, amid the gloom, a quiet resilience remains. American farmers are no strangers to hardship. They've battled drought, flood, insects, and market crashes for generations. Many refuse to give up. They are cutting costs to the bone, delaying equipment upgrades, selling off parcels of land, trimming their herds. Some are selling just enough grain or livestock to pay their bills. Others are clinging to their crops, gambling that the trade war will end before the grain rots in storage. Consider this. 48% of last fall's corn and soybean harvest is still sitting unsold. That's tens of millions of tons of grain stacked in bins, bags, and piles across the countryside. An unofficial stockpile of hope and defiance. Farmers, in effect, have become their own grain warehouses of last resort. But this is a dangerous game. Grain doesn't last forever. Spoilage, pests, and market shifts can erase what little value remains. But to sell now at rock-bottom prices feels like surrendering. Beyond America's borders, the global trade map is being redrawn in real time, and others are rushing to fill the vacuum. Brazil, already the world's top soybean exporter, has seen an unprecedented surge in demand. The moment China's tariffs on U.S. soybeans hit the headlines, Brazilian grain traders' phones began ringing nonstop. Chinese buyers, eager to secure supplies without American tariffs, turned to Brazil with a vengeance. Within days, Brazil's soybean export premium soared by $1 per bushel over U.S. prices, a clear sign of a buying frenzy. Brazil, blessed with a bumper soybean crop, is now on track to ship record volumes to China this year. Ports in Santos and Paranaguá are working around the clock, loading ships day and night. Brazil has become the clear winner in this trade war, a position it is unlikely to relinquish soon. Analysts like Carlos Mira of Rawbank say it plainly. Brazil will be the main supplier, replacing U.S. soybeans to China. Other winners are emerging. 2. Argentina and Paraguay in soybeans, and Australia and Argentina in wheat. What we're witnessing isn't just a temporary market shift. It's the acceleration of a global realignment that began during the 2018 trade war, a long-term pivot away from U.S. agriculture. And history shows once market share is lost, it's hard to win back. The fallout is spreading across U.S. infrastructure, too. In the Pacific Northwest, massive grain terminals designed to ship soybeans and corn across the Pacific are going quiet. These terminals, optimized for high-volume exports to Asia, thrive on speed and scale. But with Chinese demand evaporated, some have reduced operations to a crawl. Railroads that once hauled endless trains of grain from the Midwest to the coast now find many of their cars sitting idle. It's a scene eerily reminiscent of late 2018 when the last tariff war left soybean elevators in Washington state nearly empty. But this time, the glut of grain has nowhere to go. Silos are full and some grain is piling up on the ground, exposed to the elements. This is what economists call a displacement crisis. When goods meant for export flood the domestic market, crashing prices until someone somewhere finds a use for them, and the logistical challenges are growing. In a new twist, the U.S. government floated the idea of penalizing Chinese-built ships operating in American ports, proposing fees up to $1.5 million per vessel. If enacted, these rules would the shipping lanes that move U.S. corn and soy to Asia. 2/3 of America's corn exports rely on these ships. Farm groups and shipping companies alike are warning. This could create chaos at the ports, higher freight costs, and slower deliveries. Every added layer of friction makes U.S. grains and meat less competitive. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, South American ports are booming. But success brings its own headaches. Brazil's ports are congested. Its interior roads battered by trucks racing soybeans to the coast are struggling to keep pace. The Brazilian real has strengthened thanks to soaring exports, which could eventually make Brazilian goods pricier. But for now, Brazilian farmers are cashing in. While their American counterparts look on from the sidelines, Europe is watching closely too. Historically, a buyer of U.S. soybeans for livestock feed, the European Union is now considering retaliatory tariffs on U.S. soybeans. If those duties take effect, American farmers could be shut out of both the Chinese and European markets. Brazil and Canada would likely fill the void in Europe, while China continues leaning on Brazil and Argentina. By the middle of 2025, the tariffs were meant to be a bargaining chip, a tough negotiating tactic to force better trade deals. But the cost has been staggering. Farmers, it turns out, are the foot soldiers in this trade war, taking the hits on the front lines while politicians debate in faraway capitals. President Trump, for his part, remains defiant. He insists the pain is temporary. He claims that other nations are desperate to make a deal and that these tough measures will secure long-term gains. In late May, facing growing political pressure, the U.S. and China agreed to a tentative 90-day ceasefire, rolling back some tariffs to reopen negotiations. Grain markets welcomed the truce. Soybean prices ticked up to a 3-month high. For battered farmers, it was a small but much-needed glimmer of hope. Farmer advocacy groups like the American Soybean Association are urging the government to turn this truce into something lasting, a true Phase 2 agreement that removes the tariffs permanently. Obstacles can become opportunities, ASA's president argued, practically begging for swift negotiations, but every week without resolution means more unsold grain, more unpaid bills, and more farmers wondering if their livelihoods will survive the season. In Washington, officials are already dusting off the old playbook. Talks of another round of farm aid payments are circulating. Echoes of 2018 and 2019, when the government sent $23 billion in bailout checks to farmers to cushion the blow of lost exports. But the sentiment on the ground remains unchanged. Farmers would rather have customers, not compensation. Trade, not aid, they say again and again. They want reliable markets, not government handouts that can't possibly replace what they've lost. Yet in 2025, the whispers of another farm bailout are growing louder. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, a new face in this evolving story, has confirmed that infrastructure is being prepared to assist farmers if the economic damage deepens. Senators from key farm states are pressing for quick action, desperate, to avoid a full-scale collapse on their watch. But no government check can cover 100% of the losses, and for many family farms teetering on the edge. And so, as spring gives way to summer, the farmers of America do what they've always done. And they plant through the hope that somewhere, somehow, markets will open again. Incredibly, the 2025 planting season is progressing ahead of schedule. Rows of corn and soybeans stretch to the horizon. Seeds of hope or symbols of futility? No one yet knows. Rural America holds its breath. Will there be buyers at harvest? Or will these fields of green turn into fields of financial ruin? The answer remains elusive. Globally, trade flows have already shifted in ways that may be hard to reverse. Even if a deal is struck tomorrow, the world has moved on. Chinese feed companies are learning to survive without U.S. soybeans. Brazilian farmers are planting more. Argentine exporters are expanding. These are changes that don't disappear overnight. Once lost, market share and trust take years, if not decades, to rebuild, and in some cases, they may never come back. American Soybean Association President Caleb Ragland has warned that U.S. farmers are still struggling to recover from the market share losses of the 2018-2019 trade war. Those scars remain fresh, and now new wounds have opened. Meanwhile, logistical bottlenecks are forming across the U.S. supply chain. Pacific Northwest grain terminals built to move massive volumes to Asia are running out of grain to ship. Railroads that once hummed with grain cars now sit idle while silos across the Midwest overflow with unsold crops. Even the ships themselves are caught in the crossfire. Proposed U.S. regulations would slap multi-million-dollar fees on vessels built in China or operated by Chinese firms. U.S. agriculture loses another step in the global race for competitiveness. Meanwhile, ports in Brazil and Argentina are booming. Brazil's victory in soy comes at a cost of its own: congested terminals, overburdened highways, and a rising currency. But for now, Brazilian farmers are profiting handsomely while their American counterparts struggle to survive. In Europe, the situation is evolving. The EU, once a key customer for U.S. soy, is considering retaliatory tariffs of its own. If enacted, America's soybeans could find themselves locked out of two of the world's largest markets, China and Europe. In their place, Brazilian soy and Canadian canola. By mid-2025, America's Farm Belt stands at a crossroads. This trade war was supposed to be a temporary measure, a hard-nosed bargaining tactic to bring America better deals. But how long can farmers absorb the blows while waiting for results? They've become the collateral damage of a political gamble. Soldiers in a battle they didn't start and can't win alone. Still, President Trump doubles down, insisting that other nations will blink first. He promises long-term gains for short-term pain. But the clock is ticking, and in the meantime, another harvest approaches. Another season of uncertainty looms. A tentative 90-day truce is in place, giving farmers a faint glimmer of hope. Grain markets responded with cautious optimism, soybeans ticking up from their lows. But this is a fragile peace. Farmer groups are pleading for something more permanent, a true end to the tariffs, a reopening of markets, a return to normalcy. Back on the farms, there are no easy answers. Each passing week without a deal means more unsold grain, more missed payments, more families on the brink. Aid payments may soften the blow, but they won't restore what's been lost. A government check can't replace 4 decades of market trust. And so we return to where we began. A lone farmer standing in a sea of abundance. A field of golden wheat and towering corn stretches behind him. An image of plenty, but instead of celebration, there is doubt. Will anyone buy this crop? At what price? How long can he keep going like this? Overhead, the sun beats down on a landscape filled with questions, and on the horizon, no clear answers. This is the story of American agriculture in 2025, a harvest at risk, a livelihood in limbo, a trade war whose true cost is only now coming into focus. Remember to hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.